Parmenides is a Platonic dialogue and is widely considered to be one of the most challenging and enigmatic of Plato's dialogues. The heart of the dialogue opens with a challenge by Socrates to the elder Parmenides and Zeno. Zeno has argued that if, as the pluralists say, things are many, then they will be both like and unlike. But this is an impossible situation, for unlike things cannot be like, nor like things unlike. But Socrates says that this difficulty vanishes if we are prepared to make the distinction between sensibles on one hand and forms in which sensibles participate on the other. Thus, one and the same thing can be both like and unlike, or one and many, while participating in the forms of likeness and unlikeness, of unity and plurality. I am one man, and as such partake of the form of beauty, but I also have many parts, and in this respect I partake of the form of plurality. We've talked about the Platonic theory of forms in one of our earlier videos. Anyway, at this point, Parmenides takes over as Socrates' interlocutor and dominates the remainder of the dialogue. After establishing that Socrates himself has made the distinction between forms and sensibles, Parmenides asks him what sort of form he is prepared to recognize. Socrates replies that he has no doubt about the existence of mathematical, ethical, and aesthetic forms, for example, unity, plurality, goodness, beauty, but is unsure of forms of man, fire, and water, etc. For the remainder of the first part of the dialogue, Parmenides draws Socrates out on certain aspects of the theory of forms and in the process brings several arguments against the theory of forms. The first argument asserts that if particular things come to partake of the form of beauty or likeness or largeness, they thereby become beautiful or like or large. Parmenides presses Socrates on how precisely many particulars can participate in a single form. On one hand, if the form as a whole is present in each of its many instances, then it would as a whole be in numerically different places and thus separate from itself. Socrates suggests that the form might be like a day and thus present in many things at once. Parmenides counters that this would be little different from a single sail covering a number of people, wherein different parts touch different individuals. Consequently, the form is many. Moving on to the second argument, Socrates' reason for believing in the existence of a single form in each case is that when he views a number of, say, large things, there appears to be a single character which they all share, in this case the character of largeness. But considering this series of large things, x, y, z, largeness itself, the latter is also in some sense considered to be large, and if all members of this series partake of a single form, then there must be another largeness in which large things and the first form of largeness partake. But if this second form of largeness is also large, then there should be a third form of largeness over the large things and the first two forms, and so on ad infinitum. Hence, instead of there being one form in every case, we are confronted with an indefinite number. This largeness regress is commonly known under the name given to it by Aristotle, the famous third man argument. Now, the third argument to this suggestion that each form is a thought existing in a soul, thus maintaining the unity of the form, Parmenides replies that a thought must be a thought of something that is a form. Thus, we still have to explain the participation relation. Further, if things share in forms which are no more than thoughts, then either things consist of thoughts or else they are thoughts yet do not think. Moving on to the fourth argument, Socrates now suggests that the forms are patterns in nature of which the many instances are copies or likenesses. Parmenides argues that if the many instances are like the forms, then the forms are like their instances. Yet, if things are like, then they come to be like by participating in likeness. Therefore, likeness is like the likeness in concrete things, and another regress is generated. Now, the fifth argument, called the great difficulty by Parmenides, the theory of forms arises as a consequence of the assertion of the separate existence of the forms. Forms do not exist in our world but have their being with reference to one another in their own world. Similarly, things of our world are related among themselves, but not to forms. Just as mastership has its being relative to slavery, so mastership in our world has its being relative to slavery in our world. Note terrestrial master is a master of slave itself, and no terrestrial master-slave relation has any relationship to the ideal master-slave relation. And so it is with knowledge. All our knowledge is such with respect to our world, not to the world of the forms, while ideal knowledge is knowledge of the things not of our world but of the world of the forms. Hence, we cannot know the forms. This difficult second part of the dialogue is generally agreed to be one of the most challenging and sometimes bizarre pieces in the whole of the Platonic corpus. It consists of an unrelenting series of difficult and subtle arguments, where the exchange is stripped of all but the bare essentials of the arguments involved. Gone are the drama and color we are accustomed to from earlier Platonic dialogues. The second part of the dialogue can be divided into several hypotheses and deductions. The first one says that the one cannot be made up of parts, because then the one would be made up of many. Nor can it be a whole, because wholes are made of parts. Thus, the one has no parts and is not a whole. It has not a beginning, a middle, nor an end, because these are parts. It is therefore unlimited. It has no shape, because it is neither linear nor circular. A circle has parts all equidistant from the center, but the one has no parts nor a center. It is not a line, because a line has a middle and two extremes, which the one cannot have. Thus, the one has no shape. The one cannot be in anything nor in itself. If it was in another, it would be all surrounded and by what it is inside, and would be touched at many parts by what contains it. But the one has no parts and thus cannot be inside something else. If it were in itself, it would contain itself. But if it is contained, then it is different from what contains it, and thus the one would be two. The one cannot move, because movement is a change or change in position. It cannot change because it has no parts to change. If it moves position, it moves either circularly or linearly. If it spins in place, its outer part revolves around its middle, but the one has neither. If it moves its position, it moves through something else, which it cannot be inside of. Thus the one does not move. The one must be itself and cannot be different from it. The one does not take part in the flowing of time, so it is imperishable. The second asserts that the one is, it must be, and it is part of being. The one is part of being and vice versa. Being is a part of the one. The one is a whole, that is a group of sections. The one does not participate in the being, so it must be a single part. Being is unlimited and is contained in everything, however big or small it is. So, since the one is part of being, it is divided into as many parts as being, thus it is unfinished. The parts are themselves sections of a whole. The whole is delimited, confirming the presence of a beginning, a center, and an end. Therefore, since the center is itself at the same distance from the beginning and the end, the one must have a form, linear, spherical, or mixed. If the whole is in some of its parts, it will be the plus into the minus, and different from itself. The one is also elsewhere. It is stationary and in movement at the same time. The third deduction or hypothesis asserts that the one is not. If the one is not, it participates in everything different from it, so everything is partially one. Similarity, dissimilarity, bigness, equality, and smallness belong to it, since the one is similar to itself but dissimilar to anything that is, but it can be big or small as regards dissimilarity and equal as concerns similarity. So the one participates of non-being and also of being, because you can think of it. Therefore, the one becomes and perishes, and since it participates of non-being, stays. The one removes from itself the contraries, so that it is unnameable, not disputable, not knowable, or sensible, or showable. The other things appear one and many, limited and unlimited, similar and dissimilar, the same and completely different, in movement and stationary, and neither the first nor the latter thing, since they are different from the one and other things. Eventually they are not. So if the one is not, being is not.